The next thing we need to think about is the extinction rate, or how many extinctions are occurring over a period of time. So, the background rate of extinctions is the natural rate of extinction based on the fossil record. It's what we would expect to happen in any given year if nothing extraordinary was occurring. A mass extinction is a period of elevated extinction rate inferred from the fossil record. So these are times when a whole lot more species are going extinct in the same amount of time relative to what we generally see. So this graph shows the estimated extinction rate through time using the fossil record. And so you can see this is and they're looking at families going extinct, so not just species in this case, which is a little bit easier with the fossil record. So they're looking at how many families went extinct per million years. And you can see here that it's generally somewhere around 5 or less than 5. The mass extinctions are the really high peaks where we see more around 10 or more than 10 families going extinct in a million-year time period. And so that's what they have defined as a mass extinction. So there have been 5 of these mass extinctions that have been documented in the fossil record. And we'll talk about whether or not we might be in the 6th extinction, and they mean the 6th mass extinction, which is obviously the title of the book that you all have been reading. And that book considers the evidence and visits places and looks at stories related to whether or not we're currently in the 6th mass extinction. So this shows those. So the oldest one happened 500 million years ago in the Ordovician, where 50% of animal families, including the trilobites, which some of you might be familiar with, went extinct. So 50% of animal families, that's like half of everything going extinct. Farther along, 345 million years ago, there was the Devonian extinction, where 30% of animal families went extinct, including some fishes and, again, more trilobites. In the Permian, 250 million years ago, 50% of all animal families went extinct, including over 95% of marine species, trees, amphibians, bryozoans, and that was the end of trilobites. The Triassic, there was a mass extinction where 35% of animal families went extinct, including many reptiles and marine mollusks. And then the most famous one that all of you will be familiar with, 65 million years ago, is the Cretaceous extinction, when all of the dinosaurs went extinct. And so currently, we may be in another one of these mass extinctions. So just to talk about a few of these a little bit more, the end Permian was the worst mass extinction event there was, where about 60% of all families of organisms total and most of marine life went extinct. They think that this was triggered by large volcanoes that created a cooling period. So they had several really, really massive volcanoes go off in a similar period of time. And I think I've mentioned before that volcanoes put off these sulfur particles that shield our planet from sunlight and have a cooling effect. So they think that may have had something to do with this mass extinction event. The other one you'll read about quite a bit in the Sixth Extinction book by Elizabeth Colbert. And this is the famous one that you've probably heard of, dealing with the dinosaurs. So a large meteor hit the Earth in this part of Mexico right here, creating this Chicxulub crater. And they've verified this. They will talk about the iridium clay layer that has high amounts of iridium, which is an element that is very rare on Earth, but it's very common in meteors, and that's how they figured out how the dinosaurs went extinct. And they think that most terrestrial animals went extinct, anything greater than 2 pounds. So the next big question is, are we in the midst of the next mass extinction, or the 6th mass extinction? And so this uses data from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature from about a year ago. It has entries for 112,432 species, and it lists 877 species that have gone extinct recently, so in the last 500 years. There are 73 species listed as extinct in the wild, and 17,000 species listed as critically endangered or endangered. So far, 16% of the species that have been assessed are either endangered or all the way to extinct. So 16% is a large proportion. And I will note that 16,000, so almost as many, are considered to be data deficient. So that means that they aren't sure if they should be listed as endangered or not. Some of them, they may not even be sure if they're extinct. Basically, there's not enough information to say for sure. So if we assume the same proportion is, then we'd still be at 16% we'd have a higher percentage. But it may be that things that are data deficient are more likely to be endangered because they're so rare. That might be the reason why they haven't been classified as endangered or not. So this looks at bird extinctions since 1500, and it breaks them up into island bird species and mainland bird species. And you can see that most of the extinctions historically and still occurring are on islands. Species that live on islands are much more vulnerable, but you can see that since 1800 we've had an increase generally, or at least some extinctions that have been occurring on the mainland. And you'll note it stops at 1975, and part of this is because it is difficult to say for sure if something is extinct until a certain period of time has passed. This looks at the percentage of species threatened with extinction for a variety of groups. The most threatened order of vertebrates is amphibians at 36% threatened with extinction, and most of those are frogs and toads. You can see that other orders like birds have lower numbers, 21%, but that does not mean that all of the groups within the orders are equally threatened. So we can see that overall birds, 21%, are threatened with extinction, but if you look just at penguins, 61% are threatened with extinction. Similarly with reptiles, 11% of all reptiles are threatened, but turtles, 75% are, so that's a huge proportion. Same idea with mammals, where mammals in general are a little bit less threatened than amphibians, but if you look at primates, manatees, or the horse rhino group, there are very high levels of threat. In plants, in general, are very low extinction or rates of being threatened. However, in the palm group, there is a very high percentage of being threatened. So, if we want to know if we're in a 6th mass extinction event, what do we need to know? So we talked previously about what makes a mass extinction event different than normal, and it's the rate of extinction. So how many species are going extinct over the same period of time? And so we compare the current extinction rate to the estimated background extinction rate, which again is what we do expect to happen typically. So the natural background extinction rate is about 1 to 10 species going extinct per year for every 10 million species. And so that's a rate of 0.00001% to 0.0001% going extinct per year. The current bird and mammal extinction rate is 0.01% going extinct per year, which is 100 per million species per year. So much larger than 1 to 10. So they estimate that the current extinction rate is 100 to 1,000 times greater than the background extinction rate. Now, if we turn this around and start doing a lot of conservation, we might be able to prevent it from being quite as bad as the previous mass extinctions. If the current extinction rate continues, we could lose 75% of species within about 500 years, which would definitely be equal to a mass extinction event. And this kind of puts that into perspective with the other mass extinction events. There have been human-caused extinctions in the past, and we talked about this with overexploitation. We've seen that extinctions have coincided with the spread of modern humans around the globe. Humans arrive and then megafauna disappears. We expect a lot of this has to do with hunting pressures, so how many large megafauna that people kill. But it likely also has to do with land use changes as well. We have such a huge impact on what ecosystems look like that also likely has an extremely large impact, and it definitely has a very large impact today. We also note that Africa still has many of its large mammal species, and they think that it's because species there evolved along with modern humans and their ancestors. So they were able to adapt to hunting pressures from people. This just shows those examples where we see the same patterns in many different places, and the big person with the spear means that there's strong evidence, and some of the other places there's weaker evidence or not very good data. So, for example, we don't have a lot of good data for South America, so we're not really sure about them. However, there's strong evidence in Pacific Islands, in Australia, in New Zealand, and some medium evidence for North America. Eurasia, there's not very good evidence yet, but there are a lot of people studying these issues through the fossil record and other kinds of evidence. So as you read the Sixth Extinction book, I do want you to think about the evidence for whether or not we're currently in a sixth extinction and what you think. Do you think we're in the sixth mass extinction? Or do you think things are bad, but not quite as bad as a mass extinction?